welcome back. Not that you went anywhere, but we're going to dive right in and talk about diversity and inclusion, because again, it really ties into what we do at Dress for Success, and that is increasing what we hope to see is the number of women in the workplace. And so I want to take the time now for each one of our panelists to take a moment and introduce yourself. And I'll start with you, Pauline.
Okay, I'm Pauline Curtis. I'm a lawyer, a senior Crown prosecutor. I'm also an empowerment consultant and a career consultant. And you may think, well, why the two? Okay, so my day job, I see the worst of mankind. And so I need to have a holistic approach to what I do. A common thread that is prevalent in the complainants and defendants that I deal with is being disadvantaged, feeling that they don't have choices. Not always, but that's a common theme. And so very early on in my career, that became a concern for me. I was very concerned about the narratives that we take on board, the narratives that I say are imposed, and we feel that we don't actually have a choice. And I wanted to disrupt that narrative. And so I developed a mentoring program called Aiming Higher Mentoring, and that essentially encourages the participants to aspire and to question any negative narratives. I've found, as a career consultant, that, believe it or not, there is that issue in the workplace as well, especially with women returning to work, women climbing the ladder, the promotion ladder. It's that thing about I'm not good enough and feeling the narrative is that I'm not good enough. And so my mission is to disrupt that narrative. My belief is that we've all got something to contribute. We're all, should be included. We all have a voice. We all deserve to be heard. And so essentially, that's what I'm about. That's what I actually bring to the criminal justice system. That's what I bring to my day job. And that's what I really love doing. So that's me.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Leslie Wan. I'm the General Counsel for the First Bank of Nigeria in the UK. I've been in the role for 6 months, and it's the toughest job I've ever done in my entire life, I have to say. But fortunately, I get to do some really interesting things. While being General Counsel there, I'm also in charge of talent. So I'm creating a graduate program to bring in really talented students into our organisation. And I'm also setting up a mentoring program for the whole bank to change the culture, bring about positivity, make people feel valued, and give them sort of something extra without it costing us too much, because we're all limited by resources. But if you bring the people together, you can change the culture in a positive way. And I'm also setting up an Inspiring Role Models program. Outside of the bank, I am the founder and CEO of Through the Looking Glass charity, which I set up in 2012 to help children from underprivileged backgrounds gain a greater insight into city professions. And the program's been running quite successfully till now. And we have launched it in Leeds, Manchester, Edinburgh and London. And it's a huge passion of mine because I have so many of my kids now coming out of university when, like, one young boy was going to become a mechanic because his parents were divorced, and he lived on a council estate. And his whole family were manual labourers. And so he was going to become a mechanic. And then he came on my course and it changed his life. He went to EY, loved finance, and now he's just graduated from Southampton University with a 2-1. And another girl, and it was amazing actually, I'm really proud, Mustafa, really proud of him. Another girl, Tasnia, she is the same background. She graduated and she said to me, I've finished university and I've graduated. And I said, congratulations. This is like one of my first 12 students. I said, what did you get? She said, I got 2-1 in history. I said, that's amazing. And I said, where did you go? Just out of interest. She said, I got into Cambridge. That is true social mobility. So
Yes.
I'm really proud of that, and so I champion quite a lot of that. I'm also the founder and president of the Eagle Club. It's a club which I set up in 2013 to help senior women better network and develop relationships and build opportunities for each other. And I focus just on general counsel, so it's an in-house community of women. And I also focus on the C-suite because I thought men get together their clubs and they go, oh, I've got a job, do you want it?
Yes.
We don't do that. So I thought I'm going to set up a club so that when these senior CEOs and CFOs, they need a general counsel, you've got a pool right there. Mm-hmm. So I have 180 women on my club now, and I've built it over a long period of time. We do lots of really interesting things. I haven't done so much in the last 6 months, admittedly. And also, I'm also the CEO, founder of a new platform which I'm launching now. It's called Skycree, and that's for the legal profession and the property profession. Focuses on a platform to help the property community better network and get access to information in an effective and efficient way. And just so a little bit more of my background, in my previous role at Lloyd's Banking Group, I set up a mentoring program for women, which gave me the opportunity to really test the waters and get involved in the HR side. My background originally as a property lawyer, but not now. And I built the program, bringing the people together inclusively throughout the whole of the UK. We built it to 15,500 people. And that program was just supporting women in the organisation, which is male-dominated and very traditionally English, but now it focused on women and bringing them up through the ranks. And we just had massive change in the way that women were viewed in the workforce in the organisation. It's really fantastic, and that comes from top down. So I'll stop and pass over to you.
Hi, I'm Victoria MacLeod. I'm a judge in the High Court in London. So typically I deal with civil things. Where it overlaps with fashion is things like restrictive covenant cases, a certain amount of modern slavery and trafficking work that I see as well. I used to be a barrister, so I used to be on the Bar Council Diversity Committee, and these days I'm, as of fairly recently, on the Lord Chancellor's role model programme to try and encourage more diversity within the judiciary and to encourage particularly women, BME groups to come forward. I suppose the other thing I'm known for is that I'm a troublemaker in that for a long time they were trying to recruit women to be judges, and there were posters in robing rooms saying, do you want to be a judge? Apply to be a judge. And so a lot of women applied. I applied, among others. Although for some reason I needed a man to draw my attention to it, but anyway, that happened. I had permission, and then as soon as we got there, as a result, what happens, of course, is that the people at the young end of the judiciary tended to be women and BME groups. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as I was appointed, they decided to slash the pensions of younger judges, which is just a proxy, actually, for slashing the pay and pensions of women and BME groups. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of the troublemaker judges who's suing over that to try to restore equal pay within the judiciary, because as it is at the moment, typical man, typical woman doing the same job in adjacent courts can be paid maybe 30-40% different. Wow. And that is notionally because of their age, but in reality that translates into gender and race. Mm-hmm. So that's the other thing I am sort of known for, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I think for me diversity is not just about numbers, it's actually about reforming the way an organisation thinks and the way it approaches problems and the way it speaks to people and the way it offers opportunity to people.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, absolutely. For me, diversity is empowerment, it's progression, it's equal opportunity. And it's in the business sense. You come to the city and you can actually see a diverse group of people around you, because that is actually a reflection of the community we live in today. But actually in the city, it still isn't as diverse as it should be. But I think the fact that we're here tonight talking about these issues, raising these issues and making it quite fundamental in the way we think, that is becoming a serious issue for us, and that people need to start listening. And so I think that diversity is not just about what you see. it's also about what changes you make within your organisation. So I remember when we were talking about why is it that women don't come back and they drop away, which is one of the reasons why we set up our mentoring program in the first place. And the reason why we did that is because when the women got to a certain level in their career, sort of intermediate level, they dropped off because they were getting married. It was that someone has to have the baby because the man's not going to do it. So the woman has the baby, so she needs to take time off, and when she comes back to work, you need to make it easy and facilitate their entry back into the workforce. Now, that wasn't happening at our organisation then, my previous organisation. So what we decided to do is we talked about it and then we did something about it. And what we did is we changed the HR policies to basically say HR would speak to the line manager, usually a man, before the lady went off on maternity leave. They'd go through a checklist with the line manager and the lady going on maternity leave to make sure everything was checked and they knew what each party had to do. And then they kept in touch days where the women would come in and get full pay for coming in because, you know, they're coming in. So we pay them to encourage them to keep in touch with the organisation. And when they're about to come back, the line manager has to contact them a few months in advance, and it's completely guided by HR. So HR are breathing heavily over you to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And that made it easier to facilitate the entry of women coming back into the organisation. So it's not just about what you see, it's actually what physical changes you need to make to accommodate the issues that we have. So,
Absolutely.
Yes. I agree totally with what's been said before. For me, diversity is hearing everybody's voice, appreciating that everyone is of value. It's not about policy. It's not about, or it's not only about a policy. It's not only about a survey or statistics or data. It's actually about the relationships within the organisation, relationships within the home, an understanding and an appreciation that every individual is of value, every individual has something to say. Part of my coaching, I think it stems from, so in my organisation, I'm very vocal, very proactive about encouraging the individual to have a voice. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a policy in place. It's something really small that you can do within your immediate team. Started a peer appreciation initiative where we just give a thank you card to an individual for doing something. It doesn't have to be work related. It could be somebody said a word to you at the photocopy machine which really lifted your spirit. Just doing that has actually allowed other team members to notice if somebody is not feeling on top that day. There is somebody who sits in my office, there's somebody who sits at her desk and doesn't say a word. She doesn't do that anymore because she's been drawn out. For me, that's diversity. Diversity is hearing, not just seeing that person, but actually hearing what they have to say. And we're all responsible for that. So even though we have an infrastructure in place, and even though we have laws, Equality Act, we all have an individual responsibility to ensure that diversity takes place, inclusion takes place.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting because I think what we hear everyone saying is more action oriented. It's about shifting values, about shifting the mindset, about shifting behaviors, but at the core of how we value one another, how we value differences and what we bring to the table. To that point, how do you impact, and I know you touched on it a little bit, but how do you impact the core value shift that it takes in order to have diversity become more than just a policy and more than just something that you talk about? Leslie, you gave a great example of what you're doing, but other examples and other advice that you can give in terms of how we shift the behavior and the mindset.
My personal experience is that it starts with the individual. If you can empower the individual, then that has a far-reaching impact. the individual knows what they're about, what they're capable of, who they are, change the narrative, and then once they have that sense, and I think some of us will take it for granted, but there is a real need for that empowering of the individual, for that reinforcing or affirmation of a story that's worthy of them. As I said, my background is my main job. I see the worst of mankind. They haven't been born that way. I go into schools, I do programs and workshops around storytelling and who are you and who do you want to be. And let's look at the evidence. The evidence that suggests that you are less than who you are isn't correct. So let's look for the correct evidence, the affirming evidence. And let's let you own your own voice, your own story, so that when you get that conflicting information, you can bat it away because you have evidence that suggests otherwise. That even exists in the workplace. I have a story where a fellow colleague, married with children, he wanted to run for a particular post, and he had to give a presentation. And he wasn't aware that he had to give this presentation. And I said to him, I'm really looking forward to your presentation because you have to convince us to vote for you. And he said, I can't do a presentation. And he said, because my boss told me that I can't do a presentation. I would not be good. I'd never be a good presenter. Now, his position doesn't involve presenting. So he never had an opportunity to demonstrate that skill. But because his manager told him that he wasn't any good, he owned it. And in fact, he disappeared. And so it just shows that if you don't capture that story early on, the far-reaching consequences are profound. So that's my view. If you can own your individual story, irrespective of your grade, your race, your gender, that has a much more powerful impact than anything.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to shift just a little bit, but we talked about it and touched on it earlier in terms of the retention of women, and also, or more so, when we see progression in the career ladder, we see women trickle off. And we touched on a little bit as to why that is, women coming back from maternity leave. We don't really have, we see that in the U.S. too, but I don't know that we have the same incentive and problems because we don't get that much time off. I know when I came here and somebody asked me how much time, I got 2 children, and they asked me how much time I had off, and I was like 6 weeks, and they looked at me like, what? And it was just our norm. So we don't get to miss it that long. And that isn't right, I feel. But I digress. It's a whole other conversation. But when we look at the career ladder and we see fewer women at the top, what are your thoughts on that? Ways that we can impact that, reasons for that, which we've touched on a little bit. But not everybody's having children, and we still see an impact. So. Whoever wants to take that first.
It just occurred to me that the ladder, in the judiciary, there really isn't a ladder in the first place. What tends to happen is the men go in a bit higher to start with.
Well, there's that, yeah.
And the women will be in the lower rungs, and there isn't career mobility within the judiciary in any sort of normal sense of the word. So it's quite unusual to go from one level to another. You might go at one level, but you don't really climb all the way up. And I think that may be at the heart of why it is that at the lower end of the judiciary we have more women, the top end we don't. The more prestigious end is the top, and there isn't a process of internal development. It's always external recruitment based on career experience, if you like, out in the workplace as a lawyer. And once a woman joins the judiciary, perhaps works county court judge, it fits around their family commitments perhaps better than a High Court appointment might, but there aren't really the gateways to then progress later in their career. So I think in the judiciary what we tend to see is not so much women dropping out, but women not developing and moving to the top. And it's that, it really comes back almost to what I said about leadership. I think it's that sort of rigid structure, that top-down structure, that if you're little like the the Royal Navy as it was in the 18th century. If you're from a particular background, you'll never be an officer. You don't get promoted beyond a certain level, and that rigidity of structure is just, if you like, there's a feminist argument here. It's the encapsulation of a particular type of social structure that's been there for a very long time. So it would be nice if there were ladders to start with. I think in the judiciary.
We could start there, build the ladder. Yes. Leslie, your thoughts?
So I'm going to talk about it from a different perspective. I'm going to talk about it from the client perspective. I think clients have a really significant role to play in changing this concept. I think that we have a huge amount of influence over our suppliers, i.e. law firms, and we can make demands of, and we do actually, and the general counsel community has really jumped onto this, including not just the women, but the men. Okay, we talk about it all the time in the general counsel community. And we demand our law firms show us more diversity, greater diversity, and it doesn't just mean ethnic minorities, it means women at the table. I actually want to see it because it's actually going to impact on whether or not you get the deal or not. I want to see when you bring in your people to work for us on legal issues, I want to see more diversity. And I'm actually seeing that. And it's so interesting because I did a panel review for three, a beauty parade last week for 3 different groups of people. And the one that we've selected is the panel which came in with an Englishman, an Englishwoman, no, Australian woman, and an Indian British man. And I just thought that is a proper panel. It's like a true diversity. You've got everything in there. That's what I want to see. And then the first one came and it was like 2 men, white men. And basically, I just thought to myself, come on, guys, think about, what you're trying to secure the work. You're trying to win us over. Do you not understand what we want? We're your clients. You've got to think outside the box. And recently I hired a new law firm to come and work for me, and we're an African bank, in case you didn't know. And so he came in to meet me and he said, can I bring an associate with me? I said, yes, of course. She's going to come and help and do notes. And she actually was African. And I just thought to myself, and he's a proper English, terribly, terribly posh. And he was making the effort to recognise that culturally we are an African bank, and actually we do have people who would understand our culture better. We're going to bring them along, and I think that's very cool. That's the kind of thing that we want to see. I didn't ask him to do that. It's just he's thinking this is what we should be doing, which is the right thing. I also noticed something really interesting in the recruitment process. At my previous role, which is very English, we couldn't get enough diversity in the bank. We just couldn't get enough people from, different ethnic minority backgrounds. But in my bank, that's primarily what we get. So I can tell you now that if you're looking to increase diversity in your organisation, it is out there. And I was just quite fascinated to see all the CVs coming in. Most of them were of an African background, so or European, and so I think it's really interesting to see that there are people out there who are really talented. Their CVs are outstanding. I wouldn't know who to choose. So, if you push for it, you can actually get what you want.
Fantastic. We're going to move a little bit in terms of, and I think we touched on it already, diversity in leadership and the importance of diversity in leadership, and your thoughts on that. A bit more than what we've already heard. Do you want to start?
Yes. Yeah. Well, of course, that's a given. The leadership should represent the people they lead, not only for aspirational reasons, but also for credibility. It is a toughie. It is certainly a tough one to get the leadership that represents its followers, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible for the leadership to want to surround themselves with those employees who are willing to engage and contribute and to have a voice, because it will let them lead even more effectively. But I think it also takes a very dynamic and very confident leadership team to recognise that, to recognise that they don't have all the answers, and in fact they do need to revert to their employees or their staff. If you think about all of the wonderful things that have happened within an organisation, they haven't all come from the leaders.
Right.
They've actually come from the employees. Prime example, something like talcum powder was actually developed by an employee, not Johnson's. You know, the Kindle wasn't developed by Amazon, it was an employee.
Right.
So as soon as leaders recognise that there's a difference between the traditional way of managing and where you say this, you know, top-down, very traditional way of and it's not even leadership, it's managing, then you will get a lot more out of your staff. And as a result of that, you will have a diverse staff who are willing and committed to the organisation, to the vision, and its success.
I mean, I've already sort of made my views clear about leadership. I'd rather have less of it, in a way. But I think if you break leadership, and I think some of it, when we think about leadership, the traditional structure is, it's not just leadership, it's power, and it's ego. And you can have leadership without, certainly, the ego, and perhaps with less power. You don't have to lead from the front. And the traditional structures, again, in the judiciary, which is kind of obviously what I know about, really are derived from the idea of power. And leadership equals merit doesn't follow.
No.
There can be someone who's not, quote, a leader, but who is really good at something and really important to an organisation. So I think and I say, it goes without saying, of course you need diversity in leadership, but I think you need more than that. You need a different kind of leadership. And that means a collaborative form of leadership. It doesn't mean a greasy pole type leadership, where you're kicking the person below you, or where you're telling them what to do, and where your view as top person is automatically the right view.
I think you see that structure a lot, though, in the
Yeah.
legal field.
Yeah.
It seems to be that power is synonymous with leadership, and it certainly is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, like from the legal perspective, from private practice, it is really tough. You do see those structures. Yeah, we've all been there. I just wonder, just applying some of the things that we do, like on the in-house side, that I've been working in-house for over 10 years now. So one of the things that I've tried to do inside my little bank in the UK is I've tried to empower the people, and I've tried to raise the profile of the people, and I've tried to get buy-in from the people. And it's really hard because if you don't get that, then you can't, your leadership will fail. To be successful, you've got to get the buy-in of the people. And so what I do is I go around and I identify people and I say, I've got a little project I'd like you to lead on. Can you be the leader on this? And I've been going around doing lots of little projects, and then I invite them in. You know, I've had this experience where you do the work and the person above you takes all the credit and then reads it out as if they've done all the work. I bring the people I've nominated, and I let them showcase their fantastic work. And so as a consequence of just doing that just a few times, they then tell all their peers. And so that changes the mindset and changes the culture and empowers the people and gets the buy-in. And that's what I think perhaps we should start thinking about. Private practice law firms should implement that kind of concept to, and you know, like to focus on people and allow them to lead projects and not just sit there, do chargeable hours all the time. Because then they can raise their profile, build their confidence, network more effectively across the law firm. Because when you work in a law firm, you sit in your office and you're there all day charging, and there's very difficult for you to go and network and raise your profile. So that's why I think that's one way you could actually think outside the box.
I think that takes a level of confidence, though, in the leadership. To your point,
To be vulnerable.
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes there's a bit of hesitancy to allow other people to shine, so to speak. And so you to the point of ego, and you see the sort of taking credit for other people's work because there's a fear that if I let this person into the boardroom, if I let this person in front of, you know, this group and they, you know, then what does that mean for me? So there's a certain level, in my opinion, of confident leadership, perhaps to your point, that is necessary in order for others to thrive.
You know, I think confident leadership is the ability to go out and hire people who are so much better than you, which is what I try and do. Because you know what? They'll always get it right and you can trust them. And that means that it frees you up to do other things that are more interesting, like charity work, for example. So it empowers the people.
Yeah.
And also there is the concept of personal leadership. So we're talking about leadership in the traditional sense, but what about the developing of personal leadership within the workplace with the individual, which then demonstrates that leadership doesn't always have to be top-down,
Power.
but it could be lateral as well. And then if you have the confident, vulnerable leader, they will be prepared to step back and, as you say, let the other employees develop their own personal leadership. And that can only be for the good of the organisation or the company. So I certainly advocate the organisation emphasising, even possibly during their selection and recruiting, or recruiting and selection process, the value of personal leadership and what are you bringing to the table, as opposed to I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to stick within those parameters and that's all we expect of you. When you do that, I believe you miss out on so much more.
I mean, I think the ability to admit you don't know something. I was thinking of Abraham Lincoln, actually, while we were talking, because he was notoriously a man who came from a very humble background. He had a very poor education. He was self-educated, and even while he was president, it was notorious that he would often not know how to spell something, and he'd ask people and say, "I don't know how to spell that." Gosh, gee, I always thought this is how he spelled it. And people used to talk about how he was just willing to admit to not knowing things that people would judge him for not knowing, but he was confident enough to just not be worried about that, and to admit he didn't know something, and to find out the answer. And people actually around him found that inspiring.
Yes, absolutely. Are there any questions? I'll open the floor. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, how do you think we get the ear of people who benefit from the way things are currently? I mean, you're all leaders in what you do, so you've already got this perspective. People who've come to this event are interested in it, but the difficulty sometimes can be for people for whom the current structure works. It's much more difficult to push that kind of change or interest. What have you come across? What's worked?
In my experience, it's about the individual owning their career, and so not waiting for permission to be your great, to do something great. So, having the confidence to suggest an initiative, making it easier for that initiative to take place without any, so that the person, the leader or the person who has the final say finds it difficult to say no. Finding ways around the structure without posing a threat. Having a win-win attitude. And being prepared as an individual, being prepared to shoulder the burden until such time that it becomes the norm. So essentially, it's about taking control of your career. That's been my experience.
My motto is it's better to beg for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Yes,
it's
I
true.
agree. I agree.
I'm so sorry. I didn't
agree.
realise that I was required to ask you to do
Yes.
that first. I won't do that again, but it's already done. And I think it is very effective, and I've used it many times, and I do it now. But I think an example of what Pauline was saying was. My Looking Glass charity. I did that when I was at my last job, and I did it in my time because we were allowed to do 40 hours of charity. So I just thought, I'm going to do this, and so I just did it. And I had a legal team, and I said, let's do some charity work, and they said yes. So in between, doing the legal work, we all got involved and started building up this concept. And once you have, success has many, Success has many owners, but failure is an orphan. So once you build up your concept and you make it quite successful, and you think this is a really great idea, I would then take my concept and I walked around the bank to senior people saying, oh, I've got a really great idea for a charity initiative. I'd love you to hear about it. Now, senior executives love when someone comes and says, are you interested in sponsoring my charity thing? Oh yeah, I'll put my name on it if it's really interesting. And you can actually get buy-in quickly to get the ear of people once they see the stuff that you've done, and it builds confidence in you, and it promotes your profile through the organisation. And then one day someone senior will say, I need someone to do this project. Oh, let's ask Leslie to do it. I know she's already done something similar. So it is a lot of work, but it's worth it. And what you do is you go around and you get the buy-in from people and you spread it around and make them feel very important to be sponsors and not do any work, but you do all the work and make it successful, whatever that project is.
I'm an only child, so I was kind of used to getting stuck working on my parents, and kind of I think suing over your pension is not a popular thing to do. So I've had to stand up to some fairly powerful people, and actually I think having a core set of values, and actually having people understand that you're not going to actually depart from those, and that you're prepared to make a pain in the neck of yourself. So just a little bit of fear actually does get the ear as well sometimes. If it's wrong, call it out. If there's something that the leadership need to know, if there's something wrong happening, it only takes, as they say, one good person. We've got to make sure that we don't sit back and just listen embarrassed to something that shouldn't be happening. We should call it out. And if that means going on and on about it, and making a pain in the neck of yourself, then so be it. And I think that is one way of getting the attention of the ear of those with power.
How do we create future leadership? Where do you think that should start?
Again, I say with the individual, you hone your own personal leadership and then you take that into the workplace. And part of that would be looking for issues that you can provide the solution to. It doesn't have to be something big, something small. And then by you taking that initiative, you're actually modelling the behaviour for those who are not confident, for those who are new into the organisation. If they see that you're able to demonstrate that level of, or that kind of leadership, it then starts to become the norm. And then other people step up and develop their own personal leadership.
I'm also interested as well in about the evidence base. So if you take it into schools, what evidence are you looking for, that it works, etc. as well. I'm just asking this because I did a lot of curriculum development and I see some of the evidence that it needs to be tracked over a long period of time so that we invest this in schools. So I'm just interested to know what your feelings about this, especially because you've mentioned about mentoring programs as well.
Do you want to answer that?
It's interesting because I'm involved in a program called Real World for Real Girls. It's our year 7 through year 9 in the school system in the U.S. In case you didn't know, I'm from America. I forgot to mention that earlier. And I'm from the South. Someone else picked that out. Yes, I do sound like Steel Magnolias. Yes, I know. From Tennessee originally. But the evidence that we go by, and it is, in the early stages of the program, when you implement something like this, it takes about 3 years of tracking to really compile the data that you need to see the impact. And we judge it in a number of ways. Obviously, I think the hardest part to judge is the social impact. How do you gauge confidence and how you build confidence? Because it does start, and what I've observed, it does start with the internal dialogue, internal narrative, true sense of identity. Who are you? And while you take young girls on this journey of figuring out and really reinforcing who you are, your self-worth, what's important to you, how do you gauge that success? And we had a challenge because we were up for a huge grant, and what's the evidence? You can look at things like increased test scores, behavior at school, the lower number of incidences that occur behaviorally. Obviously, you look at grades. If you track them all the way through the end of what we have as high school, you look at admissions, matriculation through and completing a particular course of study. But the overall impact on behavior, it is hard to see or to have the evidence, but it's easy to see. It really is easy to feel the impact on that, but it is hard to sort of quantify that. But we find ways to do it, surveys and taking before and after pulses of how they feel about each other. That's just one way of which we do it.
So from my perspective, as I have my charity which focuses on underprivileged children, I'm not so sophisticated where I have that data. Like at the end of the course, we'll send out a feedback form saying, can you tick the boxes, etc. But for me, the success, the evidence that I have is that when the children, they stay in contact with me, they come on LinkedIn. So recently, a month ago, I got an email on LinkedIn from a young boy, Keith Asante, And he said to me, do you remember me from last year? I was standing outside Cannon Street Station handing out flyers. And you saw me, he saw me and he called me out and I said, hello. And he said, do you remember me? And I said, yes. He said, I was on your course. And I said, what are you doing here after school handing out flyers? You should be at home studying to get the best grades you can get. Otherwise, you're not going to get the education that you want, which is why you came on the course. He emailed me a month ago and he said, I just want to let you know, I'm so grateful for your help. He said, I went home and I studied really hard and I got 3 A's at A-levels and I got into Manchester University. Yeah. And I just want to tell one more story. This young black student I had in 2015, he came on my course and he emailed me and he said, do you remember me? I just know their names because I see all the names and I meet all the kids. And I said, I remember you. And he said, I listened to what you said. I decided to go back to school and repeat my sixth form year. Because my grades weren't good enough. So he said, I studied really hard, okay, and suddenly my grades changed and my world has changed. And he said, I've secured myself a $50,000 basketball scholarship to study in Maine in the USA, and I'm going there now. And he said, so for me, this is life-changing for me. And he said, I want to be a lawyer. So, like the influence of the law on the kids as well. And so what I did was, I've got a really good friend who some of you will know, Sandy Okoro. She's the Group General Counsel for the World Bank, and she's British, and she is over there working as a General Counsel. And my friend Alvin Hall, who is on TV sometimes, you might see him, I arranged for both of them to be his mentor. So when he's in America, he has like 2 powerhouses to go to, because he's on his own, this young kid. So, it just goes to show you that that's my evidence. When I see my students, they come back to me and they tell me, I've achieved this, I'm doing this, I've got that. And it's really amazing to see them actually changing their lives, because they may not have had that opportunity. They may not even have thought about going to university. I'm not advocating everyone must go to university, but I'm saying give yourself a chance to see and discover what you could potentially do, whether you do an apprenticeship in the city or whether you want to go out and get a higher education and continue to learn, because the world is changing, and so you need to be adaptable and have different skill sets. And spending a bit more time in education will actually help you develop those networks that you need, that are so valuable.
Absolutely. I mean, none of us succeeds in a bubble. I think that, and that's what we do, and what we do at Dress for Success is so critical. Whether it's at the teenage level or the school age level or for adults, I think coming alongside, because you never know where you meet someone in their walk of life, and you can change the trajectory of the course of someone's life just by having that impact. Thank you.
Thank you. We're just going to go and take a photo if that's okay.